Service of Change. Service of Change.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Service of Change's Changecast, the podcast for change. I'm your host, Dennis Nappy II, with Service of Change, where small changes among the masses can have a massive impact around the world. Here we are with yet another Changecast. I'm here with my esteemed co-host, can't even talk tonight, Joel Schaefer. What's going on, Joel?
I'm doing well. How about you? How are you today?
Not too bad. I'm a little bit tired. We pulled an all-nighter last night, putting our latest Changecast together, and I had some crazy computer issues, as I was telling you about. So I spent about, 6 hours total this morning when I woke up trying to get everything up so we could launch it and post it today, but certainly glad I did.
All the great men burn the candles at both ends.
Well, I hope
that
to be
rhymes.
great someday. Yeah, it sure does. There you go. We're poets now on this show. Lori Latimer would be proud of our poet.
Oh, I'm a rapper, so it comes
that you
natural.
are. There you go. You're always freestyling and riffing, as you said the other night.
Yeah.
So, good stuff. We have a good show tonight. We have your friend Ken Williams, who's going to come on and talk to us. You want to talk a little bit about Ken before I go through his bio, Joel?
Oh, Ken is just one of those people that just being around him and talking to him, you can just sense the wisdom, and then when he speaks, he speaks with compassion and authority, a good combination, a good balance of the two. So I well recommend him.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to talking with Ken. I'll go through his bio in a minute, but just a little teaser for our listeners. Ken, on his website, he talked about how he spent a night out in the city on the streets with some homeless people. I think to spread awareness, and he's going to be able to explain more about it. And he has a campaign coming up. I think he said March. He's going to go over the dates, and we'll have all the information available for you. But he's going to spend a night out again to spread awareness. And rumor has it Joel might be interested in doing that. So,
and it's going to be in Kensington.
Oh, there you go. And there's the extra added twist to it. So
Kensington.
Ken's a real helper. And he's out there literally on the front lines, spreading awareness and trying to do a lot of good things for people out there. So I'm really excited to bring him on. Before I do, just want to talk real quick. Last night, well, for people that are listening to this now, I'd say last week when our last podcast aired, we started a campaign for to bring about change, and it was simply just say hi to a stranger. And I have it up on my website and on Twitter, and we want to hear about your experience with it. We're trying to just brighten somebody's day. Say hi, give a compliment. Joel and I talked about how that little kind interaction can brighten someone's mood for an hour, for the entire day, and the hope is that they pass it on. So we want you to tell us about it on Facebook, on Twitter. You can email either of us, and just with the hashtag Service of Change, and just let us know, hey, this went great, this was terrible, here's how I felt about it. Anything, send us an email. We want to hear about it. We want to talk about it on an ongoing basis on our show to just try and spread some positivity and some good vibes towards people. So, again, I'm on Twitter, Dennis Nappy II, Nappii, Facebook.com/Service of Change, and always on www.servicechange.com, and you can email Joel at Service of Change or dnappy2@serviceofchange.com. All right, there's my mini plugs there that I've got in. So let's jump in and get Ken on the show. What do you think, Joel?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, I'm done being long-winded for now. Where are we at? 3 minutes. Always at the 3-minute mark when I'm done running my mouth. Here we go. All right, so Ken is one of the original certified addiction counselors in Pennsylvania with over 30 years' experience working with adults, adolescents, and families dealing with drug and alcohol-related problems. He's conducted assessments and evaluations for over 30 years, in addition to interventions, counseling, and referral. Like I said, Ken is a real helper, and he's out there working with people suffering from addiction and other similar challenges in life. And again, we're going to talk about his support of homeless people and some of the things that he's done. So, without further ado, Ken, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you very much.
Really happy to have you on here. So, we really want to get into, to a lot of this. Why don't you just briefly tell us a little bit more about your experience and how you got into working with people suffering from addiction?
Well, I got into it in a way that was pretty typical back in the 60s and 70s. Drank a lot, popped a lot of pills, got myself in trouble, and had to get myself straightened out. And so in my case, it was initially by following a relative into AA. We were pretty hardy drinkers in our family. And after that, getting into a therapy group, largely because my first sponsor in AA thought that I needed a psychiatrist. So they sent me to a mental health clinic. I got into a therapy group. And I think that's where my love affair with how people change and what works to help people to change really began. And it's I certainly didn't expect it to, but it turned into my passion that's sustained me for close to 40 years now.
That's incredible. Now, can I ask you? You said you got into a therapy group. Now, in that group, did they have you talking about what was going on a lot, with yourself, your personal feelings and challenges that you were facing?
Group therapy in those days came from a very humanistic approach. Mm-hmm. Most therapists worked from a variation on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, mm-hmm. which, just to cut it down as simply as possible, is that you're not going to get too far with somebody's higher order changes or personal growth until you take care of the really fundamental needs.
Right.
And the fundamental needs for the guys in that group, some of them was for housing, shelter, the knowledge they were going to be able to get a hot meal. Mm-hmm. For others, it was kind of shelter from the storm if they had criminal charges against them, somebody that would act as an intermediary between mm-hmm. them and the courts. For others like me, where I was pretty young, it was really a combination of life skills and a combination of kind of like embracing me and my problems while giving me a little bit of a kick in the ass to get moving on them.
That's what Joel and I talk about, is basically you got to give people a foundation before you can work on giving them some growth to advance where they are. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That is the cornerstone of any kind of successful counseling or treatment, or for that matter, just simple human relations.
Mm-hmm. Excellent point. So why don't you tell us now how that's evolved and what you're doing today?
Well, it's evolved for me. I've never really strayed too far from those basic principles. Mm-hmm. What happened is that the environment in which I was doing my work changed drastically. I mean, when we talk about the 60s and the 70s, we were talking about addiction treatment with a total absence of any kind of profit motive. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was no money to be made from alcoholics and addicts.
Right.
Most of the facilities were public health facilities. There was, if I recall, in the Delaware County area where I live, there was one psychologist and one psychiatrist who would even talk to an addict or an alcoholic. And usually what they did was say, bring somebody back in 6 months after they sobered up some, and then I'll have an idea of what's going on with them. Wow. So it wasn't the kind of gigantic field that it is today. Mm-hmm. And because there was no profit motive, things were pretty simple in terms of times, admissions. There was no such thing as managed care, treating physicians, treating psychologists, counselors pretty much determined what a length of stay would be, how long somebody would be in treatment. And by and large, the philosophy was that more is better than less. Mm-hmm. That doing what you can do to get somebody back into society as a productive and a cognizant member of that society, if that took investing 6 months or 10 months or a year, then that was what you did. Now, of course, things have changed drastically since then, and many times I found myself seriously out of step with the facilities that I worked in. I've directed adult and adolescent treatment facilities. I've been a clinical supervisor. I've done just about everything you can do in the field of addiction treatment. Mm-hmm. And what I saw happen was, and I don't want to sound like I'm putting individuals down, because there are some fine people,
of course, that
work in programs where there's some huge financial issues. And the financial issues typically are that they're run on a shoestring budget, and that they have to have an enormous turnover of clients in order to be able to just keep the doors open and the lights on.
And that's not a people first organization then. I mean, they say the goal is to help people, and the people that work there are genuinely, I'd like to assume in a lot of cases, are trying their best to help with what they've got. But unfortunately, the bureaucracy and the system makes their job so complicated that people get overlooked, things get rushed, and people get overworked, and it's become what it is today.
Well, and you have, like, for instance, clinical supervision was a vital part of my training as a counselor. In those days, there was no degree program. And as you noted, I was one of the first certified addictions counselors in the state.
See that. Yep.
And essentially, it was a process where it was supervised work, training, and meeting with your clinical supervisor at least once or twice a week for an hour session where you would review exactly what it was you were doing in group, what you were doing with individual clients. Sometimes we used videotape. Mm-hmm. So you it was a very painful process in the beginning.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody likes looking at themselves like that.
The amazing thing about that, Ken, is that I know from the 12-step programs, you sponsor somebody, you have a sponsor yourself. And I've heard also that there will be ministers and priests who usually have their own ministers and priests.
Certainly.
And you usually have psychiatrists who probably have done some therapy themselves.
Yep.
So this idea that you can't help other people if you haven't gotten a little bit of help yourself, or at least maintaining some help currently, that you have to be accountable, that you're not going to, set up yourself as this God who's, has all the answers, that you're fallible and you're going to do all those fancy Freudian things. Sometimes you're going to project, you're going to displace, you're going to fall for the clients transferring onto you. You're going to bring your prejudices and all your human fallibility into the therapeutic environment.
I'll tell you, I think that Freud's most valuable contribution to the whole field of mental health was the concepts of transference and countertransference.
Yeah.
And as a clinical supervisor, that's a huge issue.
Can you explain a little bit what that is?
Sure. If you look at therapy as being a necessarily intimate relationship between counselor and client, then there have to be things in place that protect both. Mm-hmm. Because one of the things that happens in an intimate relationship is that we begin to fill the voids in each other's personality.
Right.
So, for instance, it's easy for a transference to take on like probably the one that I've encountered most myself is kind of like a parent rebellious child thing, where the therapist is behaving more like a parent. And Joel, I know you see this with sponsorship too. Instead of acting as a trusted companion that's walking along with someone as a peer, they become this parental figure that needs to make the client behave in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And what the client usually then begins to do is to act out as a rebellious child.
Right. So what do you do then as a therapist? Is that something you want to prevent from happening in therapy?
No, you don't want to prevent it because it's an important part of therapy. What you want to do is you want to help the therapist to work the client through this.
Okay, so you want to support the therapist and not be so much a parent, but be more that peer walking through it with.
Well, when you're acting as the supervisor of the therapist, what you're doing is first of all getting the therapist to really look at themselves candidly and look at what they're doing. A lot of times, countertransference and transference can be a romance too. Mm-hmm. You've got two people in a room looking deeply into each other's eyes,
right?
Telling intimate secrets, back, and some disclosure from the other end in response. And it really can create a dynamic that's like the lovers. Now, the only problem is it can't be that because, first of all, you've got a terrible abuse of power involved.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
There's
some ethics in there.
Yeah, exactly. But what you do in supervision is you get the therapist to recognize this and be able to comment about it as feedback to the client without trashing the client's feelings. Mm-hmm. An example would be, look, I know that seems this way to you right now, but think about other times in your life when you felt like this and think about what happened and try to open it to an area of exploration where it's like, well, then I impulsively do this or, then I find myself doing that. And it's just a way of working through the emotions. The problem is that modern clinical supervision, from what I've seen in most institutions these days, consists of some guy coming in to scream that your charts aren't up to date.
Because
there's very little in the way of personal growth and developing your skills as a therapist.
Well, that comes down to liability. People say, "Oh, he wasn't taken care of. We got to have all our ducks in a row, I's dotted, T's crossed." And that's when people start to focus on and worry. Which I won't go on that tangent because I think you're putting out some good stuff. Joel, I stepped on you. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, as far as connected to what you just were talking about, the lack of clinical supervision, and also what Ken had said about how the environment surrounding what he does has changed since the 70s. I know in the 80s my parents were kind of politically involved, and I could be wrong, but my general impression that, under a certain administration in the 80s, there was lots of severe cuts to lots of social programs. And then what you saw, and I'm sure Dennis sees this in a different place. Dennis sees it in school education funding. You saw the last Great Recession totally start to because the tax revenues, because businesses weren't doing as well. They're not able to fill like Harrisburg's coffers in order for Harrisburg to come and give the money back. And also Harrisburg has other priorities. So that was one thing that I wanted to point out, that funding, that public funding for both mental health and addiction treatment and for public education is a serious problem, and it's something that I look forward to exploring with Dennis as we go forward. Go ahead.
I was just saying we're coming up on our break, but let's stop right there. And
sure.
Ken, when we come back, something to think about. I want to talk about maybe what we can do as your average citizen, and maybe as a friend to somebody that's dealing with some mental health issues, or somebody that is suffering from a mental health condition, what they can do given the challenges that we're facing now with, we talked to Lori about the mental health stigma and just these funding cuts and program cuts. So I want you to think on that, and when we come back from our break, we're going to get back into this. I think it's a very important topic, so please stay tuned. We'll be right back after this.
I challenge you to try to teach them, encourage them and listen to them. Listen to their stories of home with drunken mothers, jailed fathers, and bullet-filled brothers. And once you have become a part of them, once you have given yourself to them, then I challenge you to come up with a plan to help them. I was trying to prove something that I was told didn't exist. The threat was out there, and I needed to find it. We heard screaming coming from the inside. My smile disappeared immediately, and I pounded hard on the door. Nobody answered, but the screaming continued. It's interesting to note, however, that regardless of how well your class is behaving and how well trained you think you have your students, your carefully constructed order and structure that you have worked so hard to build can be destroyed in a moment. Hi, I'm Dennis Nappy II, author of Service, A Soldier's Journey, Counterintelligence, Law Enforcement, and the Violence of Urban Education. What you just heard were quotes from my story. If you'd like to hear more, you can find my book at serviceofchange.com, at amazon.com, and wherever books are sold. Thank you.
And welcome back to Service of Change's Changecast, the podcast for change. I'm with Joel Schaefer and Ken Williams tonight, and we're talking about Ken's background. He's done a lot of work with people suffering from addiction. He's one of the first certified addiction counselors in Pennsylvania. He's got 30 to 40 years of experience, and just sharing a really informative discussion about what some of the things the counselors have to deal with in working with their patients. So we're going to pick this conversation back up. I'm going to give a quick reminder real quick for all of you out there listening. We really appreciate your support. Please continue to like our articles, like our Changecasts, and share them. That's the best way to get the word out. Joel and I are trying so hard to do our part to offer suggestions on just how to make a difference. Our goal is to change the world. Small changes among the masses can have a massive impact around the world. So go to serviceofchange.com. Like us on Facebook, facebook.com/serviceofchange. You can follow me on Twitter, Dennis Nappy II. That's Nappii. And we would greatly appreciate any support that you can give us. And also, the campaign that we're launching, #ServiceOfChange. Say hi to a stranger. Say something polite to a total stranger, and let us know how it went. We want to know, what your feedback is, what your experience is. We're trying to get that to catch on, to get everybody to kind of build their relationships with people in their communities. So please, #ServiceOfChange. Make that step, make that advance, and say something polite to somebody that you don't know. All right. Let's jump back into this. I'm done with my other mini commercial there. Ken, we were talking about working with people dealing with addiction and mental health issues, and how the dynamic between the relationship between counselors and them. And Joel was talking about some of the problems with funding cuts and program cuts. What can a person dealing with this, either whether they're supporting somebody or whether they're dealing with a mental health issue themselves, what do you recommend they do to get the best help for them?
Well, one of the first things, and I like the idea of, saying something to a stranger, offering an encouraging word, saying something positive to someone. One of the things that you have to do before you can do that is you've got to see somebody. You have to look at them and you have to see them. And the fact of the matter is that alcoholics, addicts, mentally ill people, homeless people, adolescents are invisible.
Right. You're
People
right.
don't see them.
You're right.
You know, the issue that we were talking about when I was sleeping on the streets out in New York, also known as No Country for Old Men.
Good one.
You know, there was a young woman. That was a benefit for Covenant House, and Covenant House is a nonprofit that's been around since the 70s, and they opened up right on 41st Street, around the corner from Times Square, and this was back in the days of pre-Disney Times Square when they called it the Deuce, and it was a cesspool.
It was Sin City. It was many Sin City, New York.
Yeah.
Peep shows, prostitution, all that stuff.
Yeah. And Covenant House opened as a refuge for kids running from the sex trade.
Wow.
And what they still are is a place where a young person, a teenager, can show up, no questions asked. Nobody's going to try to delve into their psyche or improve them or make them into a reclamation project. They're going to give them something to eat and a helping hand and a friendly face.
They're going to do that. They're going to give that that bottom foundation of that Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Exactly. You know, that's always been, I mean, if you look at Covenant House's site, you know, one of their first things is sanctuary. You know, that they want for themselves as a sanctuary.
Right.
They do have plenty of other services, and they do have other things they can do. Right. But when you're dealing with a population like I did for many years, like adolescents with, you know, terrible things that are driving them further into self-destructive behaviors, you know, you've got to you have to make this kid feel safe before you can do anything with them.
Absolutely. Nobody's going to talk to you or open up or even try to get help if they don't feel safe to do so.
Right. And one of the things that I saw this last time when I was up there, you know, there's people like I'm part of a team that we go up from Philly. We call ourselves the 215 All-Stars. We're, you know, jerks.
215, yeah.
But we have fun. But we tend to be rather inclusive. And there was this young woman, very well dressed, really a little too well dressed for the circumstances. And I said, "Were you all by yourself?" And she said, "Yeah." She worked for one of the big houses, Goldman Sachs, or one of them. And, you know, she was the junior. She was the newest person hired. So she was the person who had to go do this. And she clearly was uncomfortable. She was clearly someplace she didn't want to be. You know, it looked like she had a good education, pretty solidly from the upper classes. Well, the next day, after we'd slept out on the street and after we'd engaged with some of these kids and talked to them and heard their stories, we were doing kind of a process, you know, a coming down thing. What was this like for you? And she was in tears. She said, I never saw a homeless kid before. Like, I realized I've been walking past them my whole life. That's
an important story, an important point you said. You know, I think it drives it home. You really need to see people because you can't start to reach out to them until you see, and not just with your eyes, but you need to really see what they're dealing with and see what they're going through instead of just dismissing them. Because, you know, we talked about this last night too with Joel, is that it's easier to dismiss somebody or to reject somebody when it's different, when it's something you don't understand.
It's a shortcut.
Yeah, it's a shortcut, and I think it's a defense mechanism for us.
Absolutely.
Where we're saying, that makes me uncomfortable. I'm afraid to ask you, do you need help, or are you okay, or what's the problem? Because you're afraid of offending somebody, you're afraid of saying something wrong or inappropriate, so we choose not to see, put those blinders on. But Ken, I think that's great advice. See people, and if I can take it a step further, you know, don't be afraid to reach out, to ask, you know. If you're coming from a genuine spot, hey, how are you? Can I help you with anything? You know, it's better than just ignoring somebody and walking by.
You know, well, Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Joel.
No. I was kind of like burning to talk about, like, to bring it back to this transference and this counter transference, because it was very interesting what you said about how it's almost like an inevitable process that occurs in therapy, and to connect it to these children not being seen, that so much of the time not only have their parents abandoned them, but society has abandoned them. So naturally, once they get in the presence of a helper or a caretaker or a professional, they're going to transfer, and they almost need to transfer. And in my own personal, but not permanently, but they need the bond, and it's that fine line. And in my own experience with, going through a sponsorship relationship through the 12 steps and actually being in real therapy, real professional therapy, in both instances, I did some transference. But once I got beyond that, what I got in touch with is that I had lost trust in my parents. Now, my parents weren't abusive. They weren't neglectful. But for some reason, I had turned to some other models in society, and those models, so both sets of models, the social peer models and my parenting models, both had failed me, and I've been left with this sense of psychological lack of safety. And I had food, and luckily I had food and I had shelter, so I was able to instantly move into that territory of trying to figure out what was going wrong with me. But that lack of ease and that lack of safety and that anxiety and that self-hatred, like right when we were even starting to set up, like I started getting upset because I thought I was going to offend you, Ken, or I thought I was offending Dennis.
You always offend me, Joel.
And I know from my experiences with dealing with people and trying to help them that these types of feelings follow people in these situations.
Yes.
And most people don't want to admit them.
And
because,
that keeps
especially
us,
as men.
Yeah, and that keeps us divided, it keeps us quiet, and it keeps so many people suffering silently. And that's what we're trying to say is break that silence. I was talking to my wife about this tonight. Talk to somebody. Get it out, because when you get it out, when you say something, when you reach out for help, you're no longer keeping it a secret, you're no longer protecting it, and you can start to grow, you can start to heal. And I think that's so important when you're dealing with some of these issues.
I think the kind of things we're talking about are vital. When I start to work with a family, say, of someone with a drug or alcohol problem, I have to be honest with you. I really don't like the words alcoholic or addict. I think they've become very pejorative. Yeah, I think that it's essentially another way of denying somebody's humanity.
And Ken, I hate to interrupt, but we're coming up close to the end of our show, so
sure.
I'll give you another minute or two to go through this, and then we'll go into final thoughts. But go ahead and finish your thought here. It's very important stuff.
Well, the first thing that I do is I get them to look at what they fear. People don't want to look at their father, their mother, their child, and actually look and see what's there. It creates a lot of anxiety, and the anxiety comes out in 20 different ways. It's anger, it's avoidance, it's any number of things. And the first thing that I do is exercise with them to get them to look and to really see. This is my son. This is what I love about him. This is what's scaring the hell out of me right now. This is what I'm angry as hell with him about. And begin to move forward from there, because unless you're coming from that place, you're really just fighting against demons that exist as much in your head as they do anyplace else.
And I always think, I try to think tactically. Well, I don't try to. It's the way I was trained to think. But, you can stick your head in the sand and say everything's fine, but if there's an enemy out there, they're still going to shoot you no matter what. But if you sit there and face and say, here's my problem, now I know what it is, and now I can address it. So it's not about being fearless. It's not, everybody, I'm afraid of a lot of stuff. I've done a lot of scary things, but I was terrified every step of the way. I'm not ashamed to admit it. You have to face that fear, because then you can come up with a plan on how to address that fear. And there's no shame in that. Anybody that tells you they're not afraid, they're lying to you, period. Yes. We all have our fears. So, look, I want to move on. We got about a minute to talk about your homeless camp out coming up in Kensington. Is that an appropriate term, camp out? You're spending the night out in the street.
Well, actually, what it is you get a cardboard box and a sleeping bag. There's no playing favorites, no bringing the air mattress and the camp and the cook stove. And, it's a program. We spend some time with some of the kids, some of the young people that are in there. We hear their stories. There's a presentation where Covenant House talks about what it can do and why it's there and how it functions. And then out onto the streets we go. And, there's usually an area where we're going to be, and it's largely to raise funds. We raised funds really mostly through Facebook, and people are incredibly generous. I mean, by basically just saying this is what we're doing and why, we far exceeded the goals that we set for ourselves as fundraisers.
When is this taking place, Ken?
I think it's going to be in March, and if somebody contacts me, I would be happy to give them the information, or all you have to do is Google Covenant House, and it'll take you right to their page.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to put them – go ahead, Joel. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, as soon as Ken knows, me and Dennis put it on our Service of Change. I'll share it on my personal Facebook, and
excellent.
Yeah,
Dennis will tweet it
this.
out.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll do it as soon as we know.
Put it out on Twitter. We'll put it up on Service of Change. And share that. So all that information is going to be at serviceofchange.com. You can just click on this Changecast article that's going to be attached to it, and you'll have all that we need right there. And I'm hoping we can hear more about this, maybe closer to March. Joel, let's get Ken back on. We can promote it, give a nice push maybe a month before it goes out, and try and get some more awareness and some more support to it. I think it's a great cause. And then if Joel ends up going out on the streets, and doing it,
you can mic me up.
Yeah, well, I'm saying, maybe get some audio clips or some video.
Yeah.
I have a digital, audio recorder that works great. So, but let's think about this. Let's explore this. I think it's a really good thing. And again, spread awareness. So, we got about 30 seconds left. Ken, any final thoughts?
The only thing that I would say would be the compassion. Not codependence, but compassion lies at the heart of any kind of human relationship, and it lies at the heart of a helping relationship. And without that, you're just killing time.
And don't be afraid to show it. That's what we need. If when you show that, people they open up to you. They really do. Okay, so let me give Ken's contact information, and again, it's going to be linked up at serviceofchange.com. But if you want to reach out to Ken through phone, it's 484-431-2931. His email, kenwilliamscac@gmail.com, and his website, kenwilliamsrecovery.blogspot.com. That's WILLIAMS. Again, we will have his links, everything you need to contact Ken. If you're going through some hard times, if you know somebody that's going through some hard times, you live in the Delaware County area, reach out to Ken. He's a genuine guy. He's got a ton of experience, and he's coming from a place of caring and compassion, as opposed to some of the horror stories you hear when people get put in through the system. Reach out to Ken. He's going to be a great starting point for you. So, Joel, any final thoughts before we sign off here?
I was just like amazed by some of the insights that Ken offered, and that you connected to your experience and to your belief system, Dennis. That honesty is just so important. There's in Buddhist teaching, the first thing that they tell you to do before you can get into right action is to have right view. Mm-hmm. You have to have right view. In other words, you got to see things as they are. And I think that is a lot of what Ken was saying. And I'm stumbling on my words because I'm just processing.
You're not stumbling. You're excited.
Okay.
No, this was a powerful, Changecast for me. It hit me in a lot of different areas, emotionally, from some of my experiences. So, Ken, I was honored to have you on this evening. I think this is gonna get to the right people. So if you're still listening, please do me a favor and share it. Put it on your Facebook feed, email it to people, have people listen to it. I think we can really spread the word and try to help a lot of people. But that's about all the time that we have. So I'm Dennis Nappy with Service of Change, and I'm with Joel Schaefer and Ken Williams tonight.
Thanks for having me, fellas.
Our pleasure, Ken.
No problem.
Thank you so much. To our listeners out there, please keep in touch. # Service of Change. Tell us about what it's like reaching out to strangers, saying hello. Email us. Hit me up on Twitter, Dennis Nappy II, Nappii, Facebook.com/Service of Change. And remember, small changes among the masses can have a massive impact around the world. Be that change. Thank you.